Hijab. Where does the word hijab come from? A question that made me question Islam. And I had to make sure I haven't really missed anything, because I couldn't find any traces of the word hijab meaning the woman's veil in the Quran. The word hijab in Arabic means a barrier, and a barrier would not be a way to describe a woman's clothing, because when God used the word barrier in the Quran, he used it in two cases. The first ayah when he says وَمِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ hijab, which means there is a barrier from behind of them. And the second verse where God says وَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ جَعَلْنَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ حِجَابًا مَسْتُورًا, which means that when you read the Quran, we create between you and those who do not believe in the hereafter a barrier. A barrier. So these two verses with the word hijab in them have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with how a woman should dress. And God is here talking about something completely different. Let's go back in time around 600 AD in the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia, to when the Prophet was given a task to find a solution to the women in his city getting harassed by the men. This is the situation. Women were free to wear whatever they wanted back in those times. So therefore, a free woman and a slave would have similar clothes, long before plumbing and modern convenience. At night time, when these women needed to go relieve themselves, they had to go to the outskirts of Medina, out in the woods where no one could see them, so that they could have their own privacy. And this is where a group of men actually began to take the opportunity by harassing these women. And this is where God revealed this verse in the Quran. And it reads, O Prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the wives of the believers to drop on themselves their garment. This is better so that they be known and not harmed. And the Muslim scholars, mashallah, understood this verse and translated it in the complete opposite way. God said, this is better so that they be known. And they changed this verse so that they should not be known. And this is where the evidence for the niqab they claim to come from. They completely reworded God's words and made up this fake verse that they claim is the evidence for covering the face, and taught the ummah that this is better so that they're not to be known, when this is exactly the reason why a lot of women get harassed. They get harassed because of the hijab and not because they're not wearing it. Anyways, back to the verse I was talking about. When God revealed this ayah or this verse to Prophet Muhammad, the women were told to wear something called a jilbab. And a jilbab is something that covers you from your shoulders and downwards, like a jacket, or let's say a cloak. So if a woman walked by and she was wearing a jilbab, that man knew to leave her alone. And a jilbab centuries ago was like a status symbol, just like a Burberry jacket or a Chanel bag. And it just announced that this woman is free. And a free woman was protected by her clan. But if that woman happens to not be wearing a cloak, then the men knew she's a slave and they would go up to her and talk to her. We'll realize that this whole idea of telling women to cover up stems from cultural views and opinions people hold of women. And this is what made these scholars read this verse wrong. And they read the verse wrong and translate it wrong to suit whatever they want to preach and implement in the Muslim society. Yes, my friends, cherry picking at its finest. There are more than 6,000 verses in the Holy Quran. Only 3 of these verses refer to how a woman should dress. The first verse is the one I already told you about, and the second verse is a verse that speaks directly to the Prophet's wives, asking them to dress a bit more modestly because of their role as his wives. This verse also proves that the women at the time were free to wear whatever they wanted, even the Prophet's wives. And they were dressing freely as they wished, which is why they were asked from the first place to dress modestly. And the third verse is similar to the first, and that it was revealed in a direct response to a historical situation. The custom or the fashion during the pre-Islamic era was a scarf called a khimar, which covered half the head and tucked behind the ears and allowed to flow behind the back. And in the front, they wore a tight vest or a corset that they left open, which exposed their breasts. Sort of like the images you see on Game of Thrones or Vikings, and I'll put a picture up here somewhere. When Islam was spread through the Arabian Peninsula, a verse was sent down asking the women to use their scarf or any other garment to cover their breasts. And that's it. That's literally all there is concerning how a woman should dress from the Quran. And hijab has always been one of the most controversial topics in Islam. And that's because no one really knows what it's supposed to look like. Some sects say it's covering everything except your face and hands, and then other sects say no, it's covering everything including your face and hands. And then other sects say no, it's just covering the hair. And this is why we see in the Muslim community a lot of girls or women always comment on how other Muslim women dress. For instance, a niqabi thinks that this is how a Muslim woman should dress and that everyone should dress like her, whereas a hijabi thinks her hijab is correct and that niqab is too extreme for her. And I personally believe that anything that has differences of opinions is not from God, because God is clear and direct with his rules. And that's what causes all this clash when it comes to the hijab. For instance, when you see a girl wearing a hijab but she's wearing tight jeans and a tight top, you start to judge and you tell her that this is not the correct hijab and that she should just take it off anyways. And then when she actually takes it off, you get really angry and you start judging that too. And sister, if this is not the hijab, then do you know what the hijab really looks like then? And then they tell you, oh sister, you're so much more beautiful with the hijab on. I mean, does this not contradict the whole purpose of wearing the hijab, which is covering the woman's beauty? And this is how we know that the problem here is not in the woman's hair, but is in their heads. How is the hijab meant to enhance your beauty, but is meant to cover it at the same time? Make it make sense. But that's the tactic they use, my friends, to pressure girls to wear the hijab. Actually, turns out God doesn't give a bullet point of all the parts on a woman's body that he wants hidden from view. And the word hijab, guess what? It's nowhere in the Quran meaning a woman's veil. That doesn't to say that the word doesn't appear in the Quran, because it does. But when it was mentioned, it was actually used correctly to describe a barrier or a separation. So if we were to return the Muslim society back to 600 AD, it might actually be a step forward. But we still have to answer a very important question. If not from Islamic history, and definitely not from the Quran, how is it that we in the modern era came down to the conclusion that Muslim women need to cover up and that they have to wear something called a hijab? How did these Muslim scholars come down to that conclusion? That apparently even the hands should be covered? Yeah, certainly, because there were so many gloves back in the desert of Saudi Arabia. I hope that this isn't any surprise to you, that this isn't by accident. For the past decades, the very people that were given the task of reading and interpreting the Quran are the same people that reworded God's words to suit their own needs. And certain Muslim clerics have been sneaking certain meanings into these 3 verses in the Quran concerning women. Some Muslim clerics have played with the true meaning of a lot of things concerning Islam, and not just things that concern women. And if you really want to know how messed up the ideas these Muslim clerics hold of women, then all you need to do is just have a look at the Islamic books. And let's not forget Fatawa Nisa, a book thicker than the Quran itself, just concerning women. There is one verse in the Quran where God says, and when they ask you about the women, tell them God will answer you. God will answer you from what he has written in his book, not from your books. They obviously didn't like this verse in the Quran, which is why they wrote a book thicker than the Quran itself, just concerning this one ayah. And Fatawa Nisa, my friend, means in English, the rules of women. A whole book ruling women. Damn. I have a duty to make people aware that the hijab is not from the Islam and it's got nothing to do with God or religion, and that it's a man-made obligation. Because why would God obligate the women an extra obligation and not do the same with males? That would be unfair and unjust. Hijab is nothing but a cultural tradition, and the real Islam, the real religion of God, has been changed and misunderstood for years. And it's not the women that need to cover up, but it's the men that need to stop thinking with their private parts and sexualizing everything to do with a female, to the point where even hands should be covered. What kind of mental hospital did these scholars graduate from? The most confident person is a person that relies on their own brain to find the truth. But when you cancel your own brain and hand it over to the sheikh or the Muslim cleric to do the thinking for you, then you're just following blindly at this point, because you're just following someone else's understanding and opinions of religion. These are not your own thoughts or your own beliefs, but you just following what you're being told. And God actually spoke about these people who don't use their own brains. God said in Surah Al-Mulk verse 10, if we had listened or used our own intelligence, we would not have been lost. It's like Muslims that are born in Muslim families and think, oh, I've been blessed to be born Muslim, I don't need to do any hard work now or do any research. No honey, you need to do your own research still, even if you're born Muslim. You need to do your own research, just like everyone else, even if you are born Muslim. And God actually spoke about these people too in the Quran, people that follow their parents or their fathers and don't go and do their own research. He said in chapter 1 verse 170, but when they are told only follow God's word, they say no, we would rather follow what we found our fathers practicing, even though their fathers understood nothing, nor they were guided to any good. And this is why I always say, do your own research. Don't just go and follow what you've been taught. Your family's perspective of Islam isn't always accurate. Your family's perspective of God isn't always accurate. Your family's perspective of how a woman should dress and how a woman should be isn't always accurate. God blessed us with this intelligence up here so that we can use it and think for ourselves. And the best way to get your brain to work is to start questioning things. And this is something all the prophets did in the Quran, and you can read their stories. And once you start asking these questions and seeking sincerely, you will find the truth and you will find exactly what you're looking for. And lastly, I would like to say I do not claim to have the ultimate truth or knowledge, and I don't ask anyone to follow what I say. But like I said to you, just go and do your own research. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed filming it for you. Peace and love.